Welcome back to The Emily Show. Today we are covering the world's fastest lawsuit, from the lawsuit being filed to a settlement being reached, where Cassie sued Sean Combs, who you might know as Puffy, Diddy, P. Diddy, or whatever else he is going by these days. This lawsuit is unlike much I've seen, A, in the swiftness of the settlement, B, in the fact that the lawsuit has a trigger warning directly under the title box. And this lawsuit does deal with graphic information of a sexual nature, including sexual assault, allegations of human trafficking, and the rest of it. As I do with these lawsuits, I will be covering the broader facts of the lawsuit, but I will not be getting into any of the details or the particularly graphic details. I will attach the lawsuit, if you would like to read it, in the description box and in the show notes with this episode, if you would like to go through the entirety of the lawsuit. I want to go over the law, how this was filed, how swift this settlement happened, what the different causes of action were, why this is potentially a civil suit, not a criminal suit. And I think there are definitely some legal aspects and some strategic aspects we need to talk about. But when I saw this news break on Thursday, this lawsuit was filed on November 16th. I was like, oh, that's wild. And then the news came out that the settlement happened on Friday, November 17th. I was like, you've got to be, what? That's wild. So an extra huge thank to our sponsors today, because covering topics of a sensitive nature aren't always super friendly across all platforms. But I know that you guys want to know the law behind the cases like this, and that's what we're going to do today. So, law nerds, let's get into it. Welcome to The Emily Show. I'm Emily D. Baker, the internet's go-to legal analyst and big fan of the cursey words. I've been a licensed attorney for over 17 years. I'm a former prosecutor, and I break down the legal side of pop culture and entertainment stories we can't stop talking about. We should just get into it. Let's go. Thank you to our sponsor, Lomi. At the Baker household, we have been using the Lomi for probably 6 months plus before they reached out to sponsor The Emily Show. And the number one thing I noticed is how much less trash we were taking out every single week. I didn't realize that almost half of trash is made up of food waste, but all of our food waste now goes into the Lomi and is turned into dirt that then goes out into my yard. It is such a nice way to be able to recycle food waste at home, reduce the burden on the planet, and reduce the stink in my trash can. So whether you want to start making a positive change for the environment, grow a beautiful garden, or just reduce the amount of waste you're hauling to the curb every week, the Lomi is perfect for you. Head to lomi.com/lawnerd and use promo code LAWNERD to get $50 off your Lomi. That's $50 off when you head to lomi.com/lawnerd and use promo code LAWNERD at checkout. Thanks, Lomi, for sponsoring this episode. Let's get back to it. So by way of a quick overview, before we pull up both the law firm's press release and then the lawsuit itself, and then at the end, we will get to the settlement and the statements made regarding the settlement, the undisclosed monetary settlement. But as a way of overview, the lawsuit covers allegations that occurred between 2006 and 2019. It was filed in federal court in New York, though Cassie and Sean Combs are both residents of California. We'll talk about jurisdiction a little bit in a minute, but this was filed in New York because in 2022, New York signed into law the Adult Survivors Act. Different than other acts that had been signed to allow survivors to extend the statute of limitations when assaults happened when they were under the age of 18, this law opened up a 1-year window to allow adult survivors, those 18 and older, to file lawsuits even when the statute of limitations for the allegations would have expired. That law was a 1-year window. That 1-year window ends in November 2023. This was filed November 16th, 2023. 2 weeks and a court holiday away from this law expiring, with that 1-year grace period to allow people to file lawsuits even where claims may have expired or statute of limitations may have run. So the first question when we're looking at actions from 2006 to 2019 is how were some of these filed because of that law in New York? And I think that's why they were filed in New York. Though some of the companies sued here, because it's not just against Sean Combs, it's also against Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Records, Epic Records, and Combs Enterprises, LLC. We'll talk about that in a minute. A lot of those companies are based in New York. But then we also don't have complete diversity of jurisdiction with defendants, and I will touch briefly on that as we get into the lawsuit. But because it is already settled, does a quibble over whether this would have had proper jurisdiction in New York matter? Not for our purposes. Would it have been litigated? Likely. It likely would have been. The 8 causes of action that were filed here are sex trafficking under federal law, violation of the New York Services for Victims of Human Trafficking law, violations of the California Trafficking Victims Protection Act, battery and sexual battery under New York state law, sexual assault under the California Sexual Abuse Cover-Up Accountability Act, which is a civil statute, violations of the New York Victims of Gender-Motivated Violence Act, sexual harassment under 2 different theories under the different parts of the New York Code. So those are 8 causes of action. This was seeking a jury trial, monetary remedies, the standard ones you'll see in a civil suit, right? Compensatory damages, attorney's fees, interest, and the rest of it. So those are all the causes of action that we're talking about. As I said earlier, we're not going to get into every detail of every cause of action because the details are tremendously graphic. What can absolutely be said is that nothing was left unsaid when this lawsuit was filed. It is a 35-page lawsuit, and it is all in there. Or it seems that it is all in there. So this first document that we're taking a look at, and I will link everything that I pull up down below for you, is the press release from the law firm that filed this suit. This firm is traditionally an employment law firm, but they have also taken on Harvey Weinstein. They have taken on NFL coaches. So they have taken on numerous high-profile cases in a variety of employment contexts. So their headline from their website, and you can tell this is a law firm that deals with high-profile cases because they were ready with their news and press release immediately, including acceptable quotes and linking the lawsuit. Sex trafficking and assault lawsuits filed against Sean Diddy Combs. Ms. Cassandra Ventura has filed a sex trafficking and sexual assault lawsuit against Sean Diddy Combs, filed in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York, and then they link the complaint, which I will also link down below. The complaint alleges that Ms. Ventura was trafficked, raped, and viciously beaten by Mr. Combs on many occasions over the course of 10 years. According to the complaint, notice that even in the law firm's statement, they are citing back to the complaint. If you're thinking to yourself, why would they be doing that? Why would the law firm who represents Cassie here, why would they be citing the complaint? The complaint is covered by litigation privilege. So reporting on the complaint, talking about what's in the complaint, referencing back to the complaint is statements made for these attorneys in furtherance of the litigation. So this is covered by their litigation privilege so that both Cassie and these lawyers can't be sued for defamation. So it is not a coincidence that they are just lining out what is in the complaint. And they can't, I mean, people can complain about anything, but the lawyers can't really be chastised for pretrial publicity when they are just citing back to the complaint and the complaint is public record. So they are very careful and cautious here. It's interesting looking at both the media impact of a high profile lawsuit like this and the strategy of releasing this in a lawsuit versus releasing this in a book, a podcast interview, or something else. This is using this lawsuit not as a way to, I should say, not only as a way to get justice, even though there are no criminal charges here, but as a way to not only tell the full story, but also to demand justice, really, through the civil court system. According to the complaint, the abuse started when Miss Ventura was just 19 years old and was lured into a professional and sexual relationship by the then 37-year-old music mogul and president of the record label that the young performer signed with. This is why the businesses are also being sued, because not only were they in a relationship, but she was also signed to the label. As alleged, again, going back to the complaint, as alleged, Mr. Combs plied the vulnerable Miss Ventura with drugs and alcohol, causing her to fall into dangerous addictions and controlled her life. Combs took control of all aspects of her life, from her healthcare to her career opportunities, making her completely beholden to his demands. Moreover, the complaint describes that Mr. Combs was a serial domestic abuser who would regularly beat and kick Miss Ventura, leaving black eyes, bruises, and blood. Others in Mr. Combs's ambit witnessed this abuse but said nothing. And if they also worked for the record label, this is why all of the companies are also being sued here, not for every single cause of action, but for some of the causes of action, the businesses are roped into, which might have given them jurisdiction in New York. Others in Mr. Combs's ambit witnessed this abuse but said nothing, leaving Miss Ventura isolated and afraid of the repercussions she would face if she spoke out or reported the abuse. In typical fashion for an abusive partner like Mr. Combs, following his violent attacks, he would become remorseful, seek to hide the evidence of his abuse, and would shower Miss Ventura with lavish gifts, the complaint contends. And it says, completing his perverse control of this young woman, Mr. Combs allegedly forced Miss Ventura to perform sexual acts with male prostitutes who he hired, and this is me still reading from the press release, whom he hired, directing his girlfriend and these men to engage in sex acts while he pleasured himself and observed and recorded the encounters. Over the decade, Miss Ventura was trapped in Mr. Combs's vicious cycle of violence. She repeatedly tried to escape his hold, but was always dragged back to him, sometimes through threats to her career, and other times with threats of violence towards her and others. According to the complaint, after she was raped by Mr. Combs in the fall of 2018, Miss Ventura was finally able to escape his abusive stranglehold on her life. However, this is not without serious damage to her reputation, her career, her friendships, her mental health, and her physical well-being. The complaint seeks to hold Mr. Combs accountable for what he has done to Miss Ventura, but to also shed light on those who facilitated and enabled Mr. Combs's decade of sexual and physical abuse. Mr. Combs's record label Bad Boy Records and other companies and entities affiliated with Mr. Combs that allegedly funded and otherwise aided and abetted Mr. Combs's violent and misogynistic abuse are also named as defendants. Miss Ventura is represented by the partners at Douglas Wigdor, Wigdor, and then it lists the attorneys and then says quotes permitted for publication. When I told you this law firm was ready for a high-profile case, they have lined out the acceptable quotes. From Cassandra Ventura, quote, "After years in silence and darkness, I am finally ready to tell my story and to speak up on behalf of myself and for the benefit of other women who face violence and abuse in their relationships. With the expiration of the New York Adult Survivors Act fast approaching, it became clear that this was an opportunity to speak up about the trauma I have experienced and that I will be recovering from for the rest of my life." And then from the attorney, quote, "No human should have to endure what Miss Ventura has endured. Her ability and willingness to speak up against abuse she suffered and seek to hold accountable her abuser and those who enabled the abuse is a testament to her strength and resilience. We're honored to represent this brave victim in her pursuit of justice." Additional statement by the attorney in response to Sean Combs's attorney, Ben Brafman. And do not think that my dyslexia did not move that R in Brafman so that in my brain it reads not Brafman, but Barfman. So pronouncing it correctly is going to be a win for me today. So Sean Combs's attorney made a statement, and we're going to get to that next. This is Cassie's attorney's response to Sean Combs's attorney's statement. Quote, "Mr. Combs offered Miss Ventura 8 figures to silence her and prevent the filing of this lawsuit. She rejected his efforts and decided to give a voice to all women who suffer in silence. Miss Ventura should be applauded for her bravery." What we need to talk about is what Sean Combs's attorney said that required or allowed for that response by Cassie's attorneys. after this lawsuit came out, and then we will go to the lawsuit. A huge thank you to our sponsor, Quip. Not only does Quip make things that are super easy to travel with, Quip has an incredible deal for you right now on the electric toothbrushes, and they literally come in their own travel tube case situation, and you can stick them anywhere in your bathroom or keep them in the case to travel. They use timed sonic vibrations of 30 seconds each, so you know which quadrant of your mouth you are brushing, and make sure to brush for the full recommended 2 minutes. They are a lightweight, sleek design, and they are easy to use for both adults and kids. Did I mention that one magnetic charge on this brush lasts for 3 months? So when you're traveling, you don't have to worry about dragging along yet another cable. You simply have to try it for yourself. Head to getquip.com/Emily Show right now for 20% off your electric toothbrush, mint and gum dispenser, or water flosser. That's 20% off your electronic toothbrush, mint and gum dispenser, or water flosser, spelled GETQUIP.com/Emily Show. Quip, the good habits company. Let's get back to today's episode. And this is coming from Law 360, quoting Benjamin Brafman of Brafman and Associates, Sean Combs' attorney, as saying that Ventura, Cassie, has been trying to get $30 million from him. Quote, Mr. Combs vehemently denies these offensive and outrageous allegations. Ms. Ventura's demand of over $30 million under the threat of writing a damaging book about their relationship was unequivocally rejected as blatant blackmail. The statement continues to say, quote, despite withdrawing her initial threat, Ms. Ventura has now resorted to filing a lawsuit riddled with baseless and outrageous lies, aiming to tarnish Mr. Combs' reputation and seeking a payday. That is why her attorney responded with the fact that Combs offered her 8 figures to silence her, and she said no and filed the lawsuit anyway. But it seems that there were conversations going on at some point before this lawsuit was filed, because there has to have been a conversation for the attorneys for Sean Combs to say, hey, she was seeking $30 million from us, for the attorneys for her to say she denied their money seeking to silence her, and for this lawsuit to reach a negotiated settlement agreement 24 hours after it was filed. There had to have been conversations going on beforehand. Most settlement agreements and large settlement agreements can take weeks and months to hammer out. The fact that this was done in 24 hours is staggering to me. And then the lawsuit did settle within 24 hours based on statements made by Cassie's attorney that we are going to get to in just a moment. Before we get to this lawsuit, PACER, the federal court repository of all of the records, has not updated to show that this case is closed yet. So this case has not officially been closed. It's still in the very early stages where you see only the complaint and the initial issuing of attorney appearances and summonses to tell somebody that they're being sued. So the court website doesn't reflect that this case has settled, but the statements from the plaintiff attorney says that they do. And when the plaintiff attorney is putting out a combined statement that accounts for both Sean Combs and Cassie, well, I tend to believe that the case is settled. So in a statement given to every media outlet I could find, and I've looked at multiple of them to make sure that the statement was exactly the same, and I'm pulling this one from Deadline, it says, quote, I have decided to resolve this matter amicably on terms that I have some level of control, said Cassie in a statement late Friday of the federal court case that rocked the music business on November 16th. Quote, I want to thank my family, fans, and lawyers for their unwavering support. The mega producer, it says, also known as Diddy, added with brevity, quote, we have decided to resolve this matter amicably. I wish Cassie and her family all the best. Love. And those are the settlement agreement statements. No disclosure of how much money, though we know from the previous statements the day before that we were in the tens of millions of dollars range with that $30 million number. Do I think it's probably more than that? Yes. But are we going to ever know exactly what that settlement figure is? Probably not. But is the information already out there? Yes. Have we seen quite a lot of um, women come forward and support what was said in this complaint? Yes, a tremendous amount of support on Thursday on social media. Could this have been resolved to avoid a court process, to avoid discovery, to get it out of the news cycle? All of those things can be true. But with these allegations coming forward in a lawsuit, the thing that's not going to happen is that Sean Combs is not going to be able to turn around and sue Cassie for the things said in this lawsuit. And we're not going to see any criminal case come out of this based on the age of the allegations, because these allegations were made covering the time period from 2006 to 2019. So we're outside of those statute of limitations. And we saw in the initial statement that Cassie gave acknowledgement that the expiration of the New York Adult Survivors Act coming up was part of why she agreed to file this lawsuit, which has to be a tremendously stressful thing to undergo. Our society is not always easy on victims. So it is a tremendously difficult thing to put graphic allegations into a lawsuit. And while I'm not going to cover all of the graphic detail of those allegations, we are going to look at some of them, partly because some of the allegations involve violence not just against Cassie, but towards others. And this is something that has come up even more since we have an arrest in the Tupac case. It has long been said and speculated that P. Diddy had a part, or a large part, in the murder of Tupac Shakur and of Biggie. So not to sidetrack, but to briefly sidetrack, in the book by the now defendant Keefe D in the Tupac murder, he talks quite a lot about Sean Combs and makes a lot of allegations about Sean Combs's involvement in all of this, and about conversations he had with Sean Combs about killing Tupac and Biggie. So the record label East Coast, West Coast beef involved him very heavily, but we have never seen charges brought against him. And when Keefe D's book came out, unless I missed it somewhere, I didn't see any allegations that the things in Keefe D's book were untrue. Part of the reason I wanted to talk about this lawsuit today is not just to talk about this suit, which I'm going to pull up in just a second, but also to talk about how much power the law can give people. It doesn't always feel that way. But when you have new laws written for survivors, it allows people to come forward when they might not have 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And though there can be criticism of that because it can bring up claims that are old and difficult to defend, and I absolutely understand that, it can also bring up claims that need to be brought. So when you look at engaging with the law and engaging with the people who make the laws, these are the kinds of things to keep in mind, because laws can change. Statute of limitations can change. You see states opening up different types of survivors laws to allow people to come forward even when the timing may have expired. So when we look at, coming into election seasons and who you're voting for, I will always advocate heavily to look at the people that you are voting for locally, because they are the ones that are writing the laws that are governing your life. And though the news talks about national elections very heavily, the laws in your state can be changed by the people that you vote for. And I think those state level changes are hugely and tremendously important. So let's pull up this lawsuit. This change in law in 2022 allowed for this lawsuit to come forth. That was a very, very long way to talk about the fact that laws can change. Thank you to our sponsor, Shopify, the global commerce platform that lets you sell at any stage of your business. Did you know that Shopify has added the Shopify Collective, which allows you to not just sell your own things, but also curate products from the brands you love and offer them in your shop too. So if you're worried that you don't have enough to sell, you have to check out the Shopify Collective. So, you can get a little before the holidays. And Shopify just lets you do your thing. When I started the Lawnerd shop, I literally built it on the platform at like 3 o'clock in the morning to sell a handful of t-shirts. And now we have multiple product lines with tons of variety. And with our offer today, you can get started with Shopify for as little as $1 a month. That's right. You can sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/lawnerd. Remember, that's all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/lawnerd to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. That's shopify.com/lawnerd. Thank you for sponsoring today's episode. Let's get back into it. When I say I have never seen a lawsuit with a trigger warning, I've never seen a lawsuit with a trigger warning, ever. But also, the law firm did post this in their press release. They posted it to their website. It's a very interesting thing to see a trigger warning in a box with red letters on the front of a lawsuit. I've never seen that before, because generally the judges and the other folks engaging in the criminal, this is not a criminal case, Emily, civil case, engaging in the civil cases are aware, and it's part of what they take on as part of the job that they do. But I wonder if this was done in consideration of the press or whether this was strategic to signal to the press how bad it is. The allegations in here are graphic. The trigger warning says this document contains highly graphic information of a sexual nature, including sexual assault. And again, we will be neutralizing some of those details, but I will attach this if you want to read it. But I've never seen this done in a lawsuit. Ever. So this is between Cassie Ventura and Sean Combs, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Records, Epic Records, Comb Enterprises LLC, and Doe Corporations, additional corporations. But the fact that this is settled pulls all of those out of it, and a number of these entities are owned by Sean Combs. And we'll get into that right now. Preliminary statement. Defendant Sean Combs is a rapper and record executive, popularly known by his stage names Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, or Diddy. Mr. Combs came to fame in the early 1990s with his record label Bad Boy Records. He rose to prominence in the music and entertainment industry over the decades and is regularly referred to as a hip-hop mogul. In 2022, Combs received a Lifetime Achievement Award at the BET Awards. During his acceptance speech, Combs stated, "I have to give a special shout out, thank you, love, to the people that was really there for me." He named a number of people before adding, quote, "and also Cassie for holding me down in the dark times, love." Does he say that a lot? Because it's twice in this quote, and it's in his statement when he said he was agreeing to settle the lawsuit amicably. He ended it with love as a full sentence. The truth, however, is that Cassie, Miss Cassie Ventura, was held down by Mr. Combs and endured over a decade of his violent behavior and disturbed demands. For Miss Ventura, the dark times were those she spent trapped by Mr. Combs in a cycle of abuse, violence, and sex trafficking. Among other violent and unlawful acts, Mr. Combs raped Miss Ventura in her own home after she tried to leave him, often punched, beat, kicked, or stomped on Miss Ventura, resulting in bruises, burst lips, black eyes, and bleeding. Blew up a man's car after he learned that he was romantically interested in Miss Ventura. That is referencing Kid Cudi. Forced Miss Ventura to engage in sex act with male sex workers while pleasuring himself and filming the encounters. I'm not even sure where we are within the boundaries of YouTube and news reporting, but here we are. Ran out of his apartment with a firearm in pursuit of a rival industry executive whom he learned was nearby. Demanded Miss Ventura carry his firearm in her purse just to make her uncomfortable and demonstrate how dangerous he is. And introduced Miss Ventura to a lifestyle of excessive alcohol and substance abuse and required her to procure illicit prescriptions to satisfy his own addictions. It goes on to say that she met him in 2005. She was 19 years old and he was 37 years old. He signed her to his label Bad Boy Records and within a few years lured her into an ostentatious, fast-paced, and drug-fueled lifestyle and into a romantic relationship with him, her boss, one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry, and a vicious, cruel, and controlling man nearly 2 decades her senior. It says that Mr. Combs asserted complete control over her personal and professional life, thereby ensuring her inability to escape his hold. He provided unprecedented avenues for success for aspiring artists, but in return demanded obedience, loyalty, and silence. It goes on to say throughout their relationship, Mr. Combs was prone to uncontrollable rage and frequently beat her savagely. These beatings were witnessed by Mr. Combs' staff and employees of Bad Boy Entertainment and Mr. Combs' related businesses, but no one dared to speak up against their frightening and ferocious boss. Again, this is why we get businesses also being sued in this lawsuit. And again, the rapidness with which this settled shows that, to me, Mr. Combs must have majority ownership of all these businesses still, because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to settle these lawsuits on behalf of the businesses so quickly, unless the agreement was that he paid and then the businesses wouldn't be sued any longer as part of the settlement deal, and the businesses are kind of not involved at all. But it's very, very fast settlement, especially 24 hours after he denies the allegations as overwrought. It goes on to say, following these episodes of horrific abuse, Mr. Combs would immediately attempt to hide Miss Ventura and the evidence of his rage. He often showered her with gifts following incidents of physical violence, a typical pattern of behavior by serial abusers. Yes, that cycle of contrition and violence is not in any way uncommon. In addition to the physical assaults, Combs frequently reminded Ventura of his ability to cause serious harm, whether by requiring her to carry his gun in her purse or by blowing up the car of a musician that was romantically interested in her, which happened. Adding insult to injury, Mr. Combs used illegal substances and threats of violence to force Miss Ventura into repeated unwanted sexual encounters with male sex workers. Over the years, Mr. Combs abused Miss Ventura physically and sexually. She again and again tried to escape his tight hold over her life. Every time she hid, his network of corporations and affiliations found her, and those who worked for Mr. Combs' companies implored her to return to him. Many went as far as to explicitly state that her failure to return to Mr. Combs would hinder her success in the entertainment industry. Again, why we're seeing the companies also being sued, but it's not uncommon for men in positions of power to wield that power in this way. Well, if you walk away, then it's all done. When she believed that she had finally separated from her long-term abuser, she joined Mr. Combs for a dinner, after which he forced her into her home and raped her while she repeatedly said no and tried to push him away. Miss Ventura has now fully escaped Mr. Combs, but the harm that the assaults and the sexual abuse has caused her to experience for nearly a decade will forever haunt her. She has required intensive medical and psychological care to recover from the trauma she lived through. She cannot, however, continue to live in silence about what she endured. Mr. Combs remains immensely powerful and immensely dangerous. Miss Ventura therefore seeks justice for the decade of her life that Combs took away from her, with threats of violence, excessive use of drugs, physical and psychological abuse, and sexual slavery. Accordingly, Miss Ventura brings this action to seek injunctive, declaratory, and monetary relief against defendants in violation of the federal sex trafficking laws, and then it lists the different acts in New York and California that they are suing under. Jurisdiction and venue. The court has jurisdiction pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 1331 and 1343, as this action asserts violations of 18 U.S.C. 1591, and therefore raises federal questions regarding the deprivation of rights. So they are tagging jurisdiction not to diversity, but towards the statute that they are suing under. They say that jurisdiction is proper in New York because parts of the act occurred in New York. Plaintiff Cassandra is a resident of the state of California and Connecticut, was an employee of Bad Boy Records and Bad Boy Entertainment and related entities from 2006 to 2019. Defendant Sean Combs is a resident of the state of California and was the employer. Bad Boy Entertainment, founded by defendant Sean Combs, includes the record label Defendant Bad Boy Records. At all relevant times, defendant was an employer. Defendant Bad Boy Records LLC is a Delaware LLC with a principal place of business located in New York. Defendant was an employer of plaintiff. Defendant Epic Records is a New York-based record label owned by Sony Music, which is a subsidiary of Sony Corp. Defendant was an employer, so they're pinning it to Epic Records as well. Defendant Combs Entertainment is a New York LLC, who was the employer as well. And then DOE allegations, DOE just meaning unknown at this time corporations, and not to tangent on corporate business structures, but there could be other business structures under those structures that things were moved around within, so it makes sense. Thank you to our sponsor, Green Chef. I have a great deal for you to get a CCOF certified meal kit delivered right to your door. And when I say everything you need to prepare your meals, I mean everything you need comes to your door. It is so tremendously helpful to maximize my time, but still have healthy meals with organic ingredients for my family. And you can pick from any type of meal plan you want: vegan or vegetarian, keto or paleo, or protein plus. You can pick. And I found meals at Green Chef that work not just with my allergies, but also with the things my kids want to eat. And you can also fill out your order with things like the egg bites that I love so much for breakfast, or easy to make lunches, which is super helpful this week when everybody's home from school. If you're ready to try some favorites like the maple butternut squash risotto, or everything they make with truffle, get $250 off with code EmilyBaker250 at greenchef.com/EmilyBaker250. Remember, you need to use that code EmilyBaker250 at greenchef.com/EmilyBaker250 to get your $250 off. This is Green Chef's best deal of the year. So go find out for yourself why Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for eating well. Let's get back to today's episode. Then they get into the factual allegations, which take up the majority of the rest of this 35-page complaint. They talk about the fact that Miss Ventura was a teenager when she met Combs. She was 19 years old. Miss Ventura met Combs in late 2005, early 2006, after Combs heard her first single playing in a club and expressed interest in signing her to his label, Bad Boy Records. And early 2000s, I can't imagine what a 19-year-old would say when approached to sign to Bad Boy Records other than absolutely yes, all the yes. At the time, Ventura was 19 years old. Combs was 37 years old. Within months, in February of 2006, she was signed to a 10-album deal. Holy shit. That's a lengthy and substantial contract. 10-album deal? Because what are we looking at, like a 3-year turn on albums? That's a substantial deal. But that also locks her in to him and to Bad Boy Records for decades. A 10-album deal. That, because as we know, and I've covered the music industry some, as we know, in these record industry contracts, there is almost no way out of these contracts. From the contracts I've covered with Taylor Swift to the contracts leaked, back in 2020 by Kanye West, these contracts are so incredibly difficult to get out of that having a 10-album deal basically locks down your entire future with one label. That's 10 albums. Emily, you're shook at the beginning of the lawsuit. I know. And this is just the business stuff. Some of these contracts are so deeply predatory that it's wild. But it also keeps her from being able to leave. 10-album deal. I mean, that could be 20 years, if not more. It goes on to say Miss Ventura's first album, Cassie, was released in August 2006, debuting at number 4 on the US Billboard 200. To promote the album, Ventura made television appearances on MTV's Total Request Live. Oh, the throwback of it all. The throwback of it all to TRL. And BET's 106 in Park. Ventura suffered from significant performance anxiety during these appearances, and press outlets were highly critical of her performances on these shows. Combs, however, sought to rehabilitate his newly signed talent, telling MTV News, quote, do y'all remember MTV News? I miss TRL and MTV News. Quote, you could hear the nervousness in her voice, and to be honest, I kind of smiled at it because it made me really appreciate what I really love about her. She's a regular person. It just made me appreciate that she got nervous, and it was kind of cute to me, to be honest. You've got to understand that success for her is coming out of nowhere. It's just so huge, and sometimes everyone handles it differently. While clearly paternalistic in noting that it was cute to him how regular Miss Ventura appeared, Combs' comments rang true to some extent. Upon signing with Bad Boy Records, Ventura was quickly thrust into the spotlight and was unfamiliar with how to navigate her new celebrity status. Mr. Combs' recognition and glorification of Miss Ventura's naivete proved to set the groundwork for his manipulation and coercive romantic and sexual relationship with Miss Ventura, a woman nearly 2 decades his junior. Within a year of signing with Bad Boy Records, Combs became deeply entrenched in Ventura's life, almost immediately asserting position and control over her and inserting himself into all aspects of her career and personal life. What I'm curious about in this, because I would love to know more about how A, I don't know a ton about the inner workings of Bad Boy Records, but B, how much he was involved with all artists at this point in this way, or whether this was specific and particular and different with her versus other talent that was signed to Bad Boy Records at this point in 2006, 2007. But this case is settled, so these are questions that will not be answered. These are just questions I have as we're going through this. Was this specific and alarming, or was this how he acted with all of his talent? It goes on to say in November 2006, Combs invited Ventura to perform his song Come to Me along with him at the MTV Europe Music Awards in Copenhagen, Denmark. After rehearsal for the performance, Combs walked around in a robe with a drink in his hand, flaunting his lavish party lifestyle to his label's newly signed artist. During hair and makeup leading up to the performance, Miss Ventura's hairstylist and Mr. Combs' makeup artist told Miss Ventura that Mr. Combs was interested in Miss Ventura. Miss Ventura shrugged off the gossip and in fact expressed disgust given the large age gap between her and the president of her record label. And that is the problem. Not just the age gap, but the fact that she is 19 and he is the president of the record label. Emily, keep reading. Emphasizing the age and power dynamic early on in their working relationship, Combs positioned himself as a father figure and protector of Miss Ventura. Even the way they write it gives me the ick, which is what the lawyers are trying to do when you read this. The lawyers are writing it so that you will feel the power dynamic on the page. Combs positioned himself as a father figure and protector of Ventura. By way of example, after returning to New York after a trip to Las Vegas, during which she endured a brief hospital stay, Miss Ventura, who by then was fully healthy, went out to a club with her friends. When Mr. Combs saw her out, he reprimanded her, telling her to go home and take care of herself. At the time, Miss Ventura thought that her record label was looking out for her well-being and that Mr. Combs had her best interest in mind. Mr. Combs also ensured he was intertwined with her personal and social life by inviting himself to her 21st birthday party in Las Vegas. He also brought along famous musicians and producers, flaunting his celebrity status and influence in front of young and impressionable Miss Ventura. Although Combs knew Ventura was in a relationship at the time, and even though he was publicly in a relationship with Kim Porter, Mr. Combs nevertheless pursued Miss Ventura. At an after-party in a hotel suite following Miss Ventura's 21st birthday party, Combs pulled Ventura into a bathroom and forcibly kissed her. She did not consent to this unwanted contact. She immediately ran out of the bathroom of the hotel suite and cried. She told her best friend at the time what had happened, but was too scared to tell anyone else. And this is where the power imbalance is a problem. President of the record label. At the VMAs the following day, Miss Ventura's boyfriend at the time joined her and Mr. Combs at a table at the awards ceremony. Combs became angry, telling Ventura that the invitation to the awards ceremony was only for her and not for her significant other. This gets into the beginning of the relationship. Despite her clear rejection of Combs's advances, Combs continued to demand her to spend time with him, including for a weekend at Combs's residence in Miami and for nights out in New York City. And again, the thing that's difficult is that this is the president of her label. This is not someone she's interested in a relationship pursuing her and saying, come to my house. This is someone who is your boss saying, you need to come spend time at my home in Miami. You need to come to this thing in New York. Every time that he's asking her that, this is why the companies are also sued. He's asking her as her boss. One particular night around September 2007, Combs insisted on taking her out. Miss Ventura acquiesced, fearing that rejecting Combs' request would have repercussions for her album deal with Combs and his company, Bad Boy Records. Because the thing about record deals is that you, as the artist, don't have a lot of power. The label, in fact, does. Combs picked Miss Ventura up from her apartment in Manhattan in a blue luxury vehicle, and she was surprised when she got into the car that Combs was already inebriated. He handed her a pill and told her to take it. No, 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 no. He handed her a pill and told her to take it. When Miss Ventura asked what the pill was, Combs dismissed her and told her she would like it. She later learned the pill was ecstasy, something Miss Ventura had never tried before and did not want to try. This was the first time Combs got Miss Ventura high. Combs then proceeded to drive recklessly. Oh, it didn't say he was driving. I missed that part. When it said Combs picked her up and they were in New York, I assumed he had a car that picked her up and is it me? And he was sitting in the back of the car when she got in. He was inebriated. I did not read this to detail that he was driving inebriated in New York. Combs proceeded to drive recklessly at very high speeds down the West Side Highway of Manhattan. Ventura was scared but did not dare object to Combs, who appeared drunk, high, and agitated. Combs took her to an upscale lounge in downtown Manhattan, where he proceeded to get into an altercation with the security staff, who would not permit Combs to enter, presumably because he was belligerent. Ventura decided to go home, but for the remainder of the night, Combs messaged Ventura incessantly, complaining that he left him, I think that's meant to be she, that she left him high and alone. In early fall 2007, Combs flexed his power and influence when he paid a promoter to create a fake flyer for a party hosted by Miss Ventura. This fake posting allowed Ventura to have an excuse to go to Miami, Florida, and get her away from her boyfriend by using the guise of a legitimate event she had to attend. Ventura was stunned at how easily Combs was able to recruit others to lie for him. So he pretended there was an event to make her travel across multiple states to see him when it was a ruse. He's the president of the label. For everyone who works in employment, like before we've gotten to the horrific allegations of assault and sexual assault, we're already at a very bad work environment that is also a huge problem. All of the employment lawyers are going, no, 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 no. No, 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 no. Ventura was uncomfortable with the fake flyer, but because the request to go to Miami was made by the owner of her record label and because she was scared to go against his wishes and face repercussions to her nascent career, Miss Ventura agreed to join Combs in Florida. During this trip to Miami, Combs provided Ventura with copious amounts of drugs. She became more intoxicated than she ever had before, and her intoxication lasted throughout the weekend trip. As she wanted Mr. Combs to continue to support her career, she felt she could not refuse his urging her to take more drugs. After providing her with drugs, Combs had sexual intercourse with Ventura during this trip. Moving people across state lines and getting them intoxicated and having intercourse with them is not okay. Within 2 years of meeting Mr. Combs, Miss Ventura found herself lured into the immediate circle of her boss, the owner of her record label, and one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry. Mr. Combs exerts control over her career and personal life. It goes on to say, from the very start of their relationships, Combs exerted his power and influence over Miss Ventura. This dynamic was fueled by their nearly 20-year age difference, as well as the relative positions in the entertainment industry. Yeah, he's her boss, with Combs considered a music mogul and Ventura at the very start of her career as an entertainer. Combs's aggression and demanding approach to those he worked with made it impossible for anyone to challenge him, and Ventura soon learned that Combs insisted on blind loyalty from everyone in his inner circle. Although Ventura had saved up some earnings from her young modeling career, Combs' ostentatious displays of wealth was intimidating to her. Combs paid for things with wads of cash and would repeatedly tell Miss Ventura, "Don't worry about money. I have money." Combs expensed lavish vacations for him and Ventura, purchased a car for her, paid for her apartment, provided her with extensive amounts of designer clothing. So then her entire life is under his control. Around 2008, 2009, Combs began to rent an apartment in Manhattan for her. The apartment was within walking distance of his New York residence. He first showed her the apartment by bringing her there along with her parents. Her parents were skeptical of the mogul's displays of wealth, but proud of their daughter's newfound success. Around 2010, Combs similarly paid for an apartment for her in Los Angeles, which was located about 5 minutes away from his residence. He paid for many of her apartments in California and also purchased a Jaguar for her around 2013 or 2014. All aspects of her life were controlled by either Mr. Combs or his management company. Every event Ventura attended, from the travel to the makeup and the clothing, was paid for directly by Combs and his affiliated companies. Compounding this all-encompassing intrusion into her life, Combs secured his control over the young and impressionable Ventura by introducing her to a drug-fueled lifestyle that kept her complacent and compliant. Combs first introduced her to opiates around 2008 and would often have pills and other drugs out in the open, quote unquote, like candy. It goes on to say, upon information and belief, Mr. Combs has been addicted to prescription painkillers and took ecstasy frequently. I think they put the upon information and belief in there because it is branching out of what Cassie personally experienced into a belief that he is or was addicted to prescription painkillers. It goes on to say, at first, Miss Ventura was given the prescriptions that Combs received from a doctor in Miami. Eventually, when Combs exhausted his supply of pills, he demanded Ventura procure prescriptions from this Miami doctor in her own name. Combs became deeply involved in Ventura's personal life, with his personal staff attending to Ventura's day-to-day travel and other needs, including medical care. On multiple occasions, Combs had Ventura's personal medical records sent directly to his email address. For instance, when Ventura began experiencing memory loss, potentially due to excessive drug use and or head injuries caused by Mr. Combs' beatings, as described below, her MRI results were provided directly to Mr. Combs. There is a reason laws exist to protect people, and not having who she is detailing as her abuser have access to her medical records would be one of the ways she could be protected. But they're just emailing her medical records to him. Unless, of course, he asked her to sign. Would he have asked her to sign over like, hey, send my medical records directly to him? Probably. But also, do I think he probably had a private doctor he was working with who was like, yeah, sure, whatever, back in 2007? Also probably. Another example of ways in which he manipulated Ventura and ensured obedience early on in their relationship was he asked Ventura what she called her grandfather. When Ventura said that she referred to her grandfather as Pop Pop, Combs perversely insisted that Ventura refer to him with that nickname. Okay. The next part of the lawsuit starts to detail some of the violence and abuse and instances with violence and abuse in the relationship. So some of it we will detail, some of it I will not. And again, this will be linked down below. What started as a whirlwind of celebrity meetings and drug and alcohol-fueled parties, however, quickly turned frightening and violent. It says, Miss Ventura was also exposed to the intense violence that pervaded Mr. Combs' rise to fame. For example, well, we've talked about that at the beginning. For example, on one occasion when Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura were using drugs together in his home, one of his security staff barged in and announced that Suge Knight, a longtime rival of Mr. Combs, was spotted at Mel's Drive-In Diner in Los Angeles. Mr. Combs began to get dressed, retrieved multiple guns from a safe, and ran out of the home to where he believed Mr. Knight was dining. Miss Ventura became terrified and began to cry. Yeah, the feud, again, between Combs and Suge Knight are the tales of many books and many a song. So I'm not surprised that all of this is going on. On at least 2 occasions, Combs demanded that Ventura hold Combs' gun in her purse. Ventura had no familiarity with guns and was petrified that the firearm would accidentally go off in her purse. There was no clear reason why Combs required her to hold his guns except to reinforce to his young girlfriend that he was violent, powerful, and dangerous. Over the next decade, multiple times each year, Combs would violently beat Miss Ventura, leaving bruises on her body. After every instance, he would use his money and power to orchestrate extensive efforts to hide the evidence of his abuse, including by hiding Ventura in hotels for days at a time to let her bruises heal. In one such instance, after a party with Jay-Z, Mr. Combs beat Ventura repeatedly in an Escalade. He forced her out of the vehicle on Fifth Avenue in New York. She was eventually able to hail a cab and get her to her apartment, where she cried in fear, realizing there was no one she could tell about what had happened at the hands of this incredibly powerful man. She spent the subsequent 3 days hiding in her apartment. In January 2009, Combs learned that Ventura spoke to another music manager at a party in Los Angeles, and he became enraged. She had hoped speaking to this manager would allow her to further grow her career and that Combs would be happy for her, but instead he became extremely angry and pulled her out of the club where the party was taking place. It goes on to detail the violence that happened when they were trying to leave the club and the injury that caused. Another incident in London, and it talks about after another incident that she asked to go home to her parents, but Combs wouldn't let her leave. She lied to her mother when asked about online gossip forums that reported the assault. Combs proceeded to instruct his assistant to purchase excessive amounts of gifts for Ventura, which were delivered to the hotel room where she remained trapped. She was terrified, isolated, and unable to see a pathway out of the abusive hold on her life. She found herself becoming numb to the abuse she was experiencing and become extremely beholden to Combs's demand. She began to blindly follow his instructions out of fear of again being on the receiving end of a vicious beating. By Mr. Combs's own admission, his relationship with Ventura was like, quote, unquote, Bobby and Whitney, a clear acknowledgement of the unequal power dynamic and excessive domestic violence that permeated their relationship. From the outside looking in, Miss Ventura had heard others refer to her relationship with Mr. Combs as akin to Ike and Tina. Her volatile and abusive partner, who also owned her label and therefore held her future success in his hands, had fully exerted control over every aspect of his life. It then gets into the sex trafficking allegations and what those sex trafficking allegations are, the acts that he would make her engage in with others, record, and force her to take part in against her will. It then gets into the time frame where she was trying to leave him. It says that anytime she tried to create distance between her and Mr. Combs, he used his networks to find her and convince her to return to his abuse. On multiple occasions, Mr. Combs sent his employees to lure Miss Ventura back. This aspect of violent relationships has gotten worse, much worse, with the advent of our cell phones and other technologies, because the tracking has become so much worse that it becomes much harder for people to actually leave and get away, because they need their devices to leave and get away, but also their devices can be the source of how they're found. It says on multiple occasions, Combs sent his employees to lure Ventura back. In 2011, during a rough patch with Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura's relationships, Miss Ventura had a brief relationship with musician Kid Cudi. When Mr. Combs returned from a trip, he demanded another one of the group sexual situations, and she acquiesced. During this event, Combs found Ventura's phone and found emails between her and Kid Cudi. Combs became enraged and proceeded to place a manual corkscrew between his fingers and lunged at Ventura. She ran away to stay at Kid Cudi's home to escape Combs's wrath. Soon thereafter, one of Combs's staff members told Ventura that she just needed to talk to Mr. Combs, even though Mr. Combs was enraged. Feeling like she could not escape Combs and his network of enforcers, she returned to Combs, where he assaulted her. She returned to her parents' home in Connecticut, where her mother took pictures of her bruises that Mr. Combs had left on her body. In February 2012, during Paris Fashion Weeks, Combs told Ventura that he was going to blow up Kid Cudi's car and that he wanted to ensure that Kid Cudi was home with his friends when it happened. Around that time, Kid Cudi's car exploded in his driveway. Miss Ventura was terrified as she began to fully comprehend what Mr. Combs was both willing and able to do to those he believed had slighted him. And if you believe what is said about his part in the murder of Tupac and Biggie, we are now in the 2012 timeframe. Those were mid 90s. And he has never, though been investigated, has never been prosecuted for those. So when you're looking at somebody getting bold, if he was involved in the things that he is accused of being involved in, does it surprise anyone or strain credulity that he feels that he is untouchable in these areas that she's alleging took place. In 2015, Ventura spoke to a popular music manager at an after party in a hotel suite in Las Vegas. Combs saw her speaking to this manager and sternly told her to step into the bedroom adjoining the suite, where he then assaulted her. She ran from corner to corner of the room, trying to avoid him. When she tried to lock herself in the bathroom, he pushed through and continued to assault her. Her screams were drowned out by the loud music playing in the suite. Combs' head of security and assistant saw Ventura after the assault. They began to cry. Ventura had 2 black eyes, a burst and bruised lip, and a huge welt on her forehead. Upon seeing the results of his vicious attack, Combs immediately took steps to conceal his wrongdoing. He forced her to stay at his home in Hombley Hills, along with one of his sons. While there, Combs FaceTimed Ventura, stating, "You got to go up and put more makeup on. My son can't see you like that." It goes on to talk about 2015, while shooting a movie in Cape Town, South Africa, Ventura began a flirtatious relationship with an actor. She spent New Year's Eve with this actor, but Combs soon found out, called the actor and threatened him, and the actor proceeded to call Miss Ventura and tell her, "You really need to call Mr. Combs." In or about March 2016, during another one of their group activities, Combs became extremely intoxicated and again attacked Miss Ventura. After he fell asleep, she tried to leave the hotel room, but as she exited, Combs woke up and began screaming at her and followed her. There are more details of allegations of violence at the hotel. She tried to leave him and hid at a friend's house. His security team tracked her down at the friend's house. A woman who worked at Sony Music reached out to her with a similar ultimatum, recording her record, and now they are leveraging her career against her, she is alleging. It says, incredibly, Mr. Combs even convinced one of his attorneys to call Miss Ventura at this time. The lawyer told Ventura that, quote, "It's in your best interest to call Mr. Combs back." Each time Miss Ventura tried to run away, Combs had his powerful network to force her back to him. And then it gets into the sexual assault when she tried to leave him and him forcing her back into her own home and assaulting her and then sexually assaulting her. And then the last section of this suit is about the long-lasting impacts of the sexual and physical abuse, and talking about the fact that she has had a tremendous amount of not just physical trauma, but psychological trauma as well. Though they don't allege things like intentional infliction and negligent infliction of emotional distress under some of the causes of action that they're alleging, these allegations and the detail of harm caused are appropriate to those allegations. It says, to rebuild her life and her career, Miss Ventura needed to completely reinvent herself. She checked herself into inpatient treatment at a rehabilitation center where she first confronted the extent of the trauma she lives with. She has required intensive therapy and other medical care to recover from Combs' abuse, and she will forever live with the physical and psychological repercussions of over a decade of violence, fear, and exploitation. It goes on to say, although Miss Ventura was unable to speak up against the years of abuse she endured at the hands of Mr. Combs, she has since been able to rebuild her life and confront her trauma. Thanks to the passage of New York's Adult Survivors Act and California's Sexual Abuse Accountability and Cover-Up Act, she is now ready and able to confront her abuser and to hold him and those who enabled his abuse accountable for their actions. And it then lines out all of the causes of action and the allegations that go to those causes of action that we talked about right at the beginning, and then to the prayer for relief, which at this point was for a money judgment representing compensatory damages, including consequential damages, lost wages, lost earnings, and all other sums of money together with interest on those amounts, for money judgment for mental pain and anguish and severe emotional distress according to proof, punitive and exemplary damages, attorney's fees and cost, pre- and post-judgment interest, and such other relief as the court finds necessary. However, we know that a court is not going to be determining this. There won't be any discovery. There won't be depositions. There won't be a jury trial. There won't be other witnesses coming forward in this case because this case has settled, which, again, the swiftness of this settlement was shocking. The joint statement was unlike anything that I've ever seen. I can absolutely understand wanting to settle a lawsuit like this from both parties' perspectives and not having to go through years in the court system and in the media. So, from the defendant's perspective, getting this out of the news cycle as quickly as possible, you can see why they would want to settle, which is not what we've seen in other cases where you've seen people say, no, I'm going to clear my name of these allegations and move forward. A settlement doesn't exactly do that. Does it get it out of a news cycle? Yes. Does it necessarily clear someone's name of the allegations that are made? Not necessarily. And for the plaintiff here, for Cassie, to be able to come forward, list everything out, have it be publicly known, to speak that publicly, and then not go through the court system might also be a tremendous relief for her. So do I think both parties are, well, they both settled. So are they both happy with the settlement? As happy as one can be with the settlement. Cassie's going to have to live with the repercussions from what happened to her for the rest of her life. So does settling this lawsuit close that door and make it easier to move forward? One would hope. Does the defendant not want to go to discovery, not want others to come forward, and not want to see this grow? I would imagine so. I would absolutely imagine so. Though even in the hours after this lawsuit became public knowledge, there were a lot that came forward and said that this was their experience with Sean Combs too on social media. So it wasn't as if this lawsuit came forward in a vacuum where other people spoke out in support but did not lend their own stories. Others came forward and lent their own stories. And that was very interesting to see how swiftly that came about. I'm going to take a look at some of the questions from our incredible members and see if I've answered them. Ann Witten asked, what is the New York Survivors Act and why is it going away? It was a temporary 1-year law that was written to allow for adult survivors to extend the statute of limitations, essentially, so that they could file lawsuits even if the statute of limitations had ended for a limited period of time. Why did New York write it like that? I would have to go through their entire legislative history, which I did not do before this recording. But that law gave a 1-year window, which is similar to what other states had done, to give a 1-year window for those who were over the age of 18. And while there are longer statutes of limitations for those who experience this type of violence and sexual violence when they are under the age of 18, the statute of limitations from 18 and above tends to, in civil cases, run in that 3-year realm for most cases, though that can vary by jurisdiction. This opened that window for 1 year, saying it doesn't matter how old the allegations are, they can be filed. And we've seen some cases come forward with much older allegations. And people are like, how are these going forward? The reason they're going forward is because laws in New York and California opened a window to allow those to be filed even where the statute of limitations had expired. So why were they only 1-year windows? Because that is what the legislature chose to do. Andrea asked, is Bad Boy Records listed as a defendant because they aided in the allegations? Bad Boy Records is being sued with regard to the sexual harassment causes of action because they were the employer, and their employee, Sean Combs, who though owner was also an employee, was perpetrating not just acts of sexual violence, but also sexual harassment, gender-motivated violence, and the rest of it. So those companies were brought in because essentially the companies are in charge of the behavior of their employees, Sean Combs being one of their employees. A number of you asked, and I see 10, 15 different questions about whether that will be, or whether any of these will be criminal charges. Um, the state of New York came out and said that there is no criminal investigation into Sean Combs. Most of these things are outside of the criminal statute of limitations and cannot be brought because when those civil statute of limitations opened the window to allow things to be filed, it did not change the criminal statute of limitations. So the criminal statutes of limitations were not shifted by these particular laws. There are laws that have opened up some of the criminal statute of limitations and extended them, but these allegations have not been brought forward to criminal charges, and it's unlikely that they will be based on the age of them and based on the fact that we have seen this global settlement, which probably includes, I would imagine, a non prosecute clause, if that was even a concern, that in settling this is the end of these allegations. These are not going to be reported to law enforcement. It seems that they were not reported to law enforcement at the time when they happened. And those statute of limitations are different than the civil statute of limitations. So hopefully that helps as to why, though these are criminal behaviors, criminal charges aren't being brought. And a number of the members mentioned that this sounded similar to R. Kelly, and he was brought up on RICO charges for the way that he was using his essentially music career to traffic individuals. But we did not see that here. Could that happen down the road if there are others similarly situated to Cassie? Maybe. Would this open interest by the feds into something like that? It could. There's also a lot of allegations of how the business was spending money. Could that spark interest from other enforcement agencies, e.g. the IRS? Possibly, because there's a lot of allegations that the business was paying for quite a lot of Cassie's life that Puffy is accused of using to leverage control over her. So, could these allegations open up future investigations? They could. Do I think we will see criminal charges that mirror these allegations specifically? I do not think we will. Could we see something different? Maybe. Could there be other victims who are willing to come forward because this is now so publicly out there? Absolutely can happen. So we will see what happens. And if there are further investigations into Sean Combs, I will be keeping an eye out. I've been keeping an eye out since there was arrest in the murder of Tupac Shakur, and I will be keeping an eye out. I hope that this episode broke down the law behind this very, very public lawsuit that kind of took over the news cycle for a moment and helped break down the law behind it, but also helped explain some of what was alleged here, why the businesses were involved, and give some understanding to what happened here, what's alleged to have happened here, and the unusualness of not only the trigger warning on this lawsuit, but the swiftness of this settlement, and explain it in a way where you could engage in this very difficult story, because the full breadth of this lawsuit is really just tragic allegations of horrific abuse. So again, I hope it helped. I hope the way I cover these stories help. I hate having to mince words sometimes when we're talking about legal, but I find that some of the platform appropriate guidelines help everyone that wants to engage in these stories without being triggered themselves. And I hope that that was helpful here. So with all of that, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a law nerd. I appreciate you. I appreciate you working through the difficult cases, the difficult allegations, and still asking questions about the law. Why did this happen? These are older allegations. Will there be criminal? I appreciate you. So thank you. So may your Wi-Fi be strong. May your stuffing be delightful. May your gravy turn out lovely. If gravy is your jam, it's not at my house, but if it is, I know that it's difficult to make. Everybody tells me that, so I don't try. May your family be well, and may the odds be ever in your favor. Thank you for being a law nerd. I am so thankful for you. I am thankful that I get to do this and talk about the law and the law as it crosses into the worlds of music and pop culture and celebrity. And I get to do it with you incredible law nerds. So know how thankful I am for you. Thank you for being here, and I will talk to you next week. You can stay up to date with everything I'm covering on our free iOS and Android app at lawnerdapp.com, or search your app store for Law Nerd. And you can also follow me on social media at the Emily D. Baker. Remember, I stream on YouTube on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I recap all of that for you in quick bits on Monday. And of course, The Emily Show drops on Wednesdays. Thanks for being a Law Nerd.